got me so excited.
So, she's still ready today?
Maybe so.
Hey, I got your email about Columbus. Is it fine, or is it good, or is it great? So y'all still be able to send the same number of people and all that, okay? All right, well, we sort of figured you either shift one way or the other. Yeah. All right.
Meeting of the House and Senate Transportation Committees to order. And before we get started, I want to ask Representative Watson, if he would, our Vice Chairman of the House side, to say a prayer for us.
All right, thank you. Let's pray. Dear Father, we just thank you for this day. We thank you for all your many blessings. Just be with us as we go through this meeting and give us wisdom and guidance as we decide on how to spend the funds that you've blessed our state with so that it can continue to grow and be a better place to live and work. Just be with all the members while they're away from their families, and just give us all a safe trip home as we travel home this weekend. In your name I pray, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Representative. Let me just say that on the House side, we do have a lot of other committee meetings going, including Ways and Means, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We know this is an important process, but I want to turn it over at this time to my brethren over in the Senate, Chairman Bean.
Well, I would just echo what Representative Tanner said, Chairman Tanner said, because we've got a lot of members that couldn't make it and are going to have to leave early. I know, Senator Ginn, you said you may have to leave early, so I don't know that we'll take any kind of action today, but we do want to get the process started, hear what's going on, and go forward. So with that, we're going to move quickly and turn it over to the Commissioner and the Planning Director. Are y'all's mics on?
How's that? Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
Well, thank you, and thanks again for the joint meeting, and we will try to be efficient based on your busy schedules today. So just as basis of starting off and setting the table, as you recall, out of HB 170 became the requirement of providing a 10-year strategic plan in really a couple of categories, and we'll talk about those categories. But to provide the 10-year plan, it really breaks down in the spend of dollars, the allocation or investment levels in the construction of highways, maintenance of highways or existing infrastructure, repair of bridges and replacement of bridges, safety enhancements, and then administration. So those are the major buckets. But to be able to talk about the levels of investment, we first must start with what are the dollars, if you will. And as we've presented both the Amendment 17 and now the 18 budget, we use that as basis to start on the state level. But on the federal level, we're using the FAST Act, the current federal funding bill that goes out to about the year 2022 or 2021 actually. And then from that point, we know what the federal government is supposed to be allocating on a yearly basis to Georgia up to that point, up to the end of the FAST Act, which was a 5-year bill. It's 1 year has lapsed now. We have 4 more to go. From that point, we used a 1% growth factor out to the 10th year. So because we don't know what the federal funds will be, historically, it's been a 1% or more, so we were being conservative in our cost projections. On the state budget, we actually used 17, 18, and then projected at 1% going forward again for what future revenues may be, which gives us the basis to move forward with what's called programming projects, or basically putting the projects in the pipeline under financial constraints. So just a little bit of an overview of where that is. And what each of you have is basically a handout that we'd like to sort of flip through, not read every word, but hit the highlights of it. And the first page is really the statutory requirements of what's in 32.527.1, which talks about this 10-year plan. And I think the important thing to remember out of this is that in allocation of dollars to projects, and I hate to read, but it's very important, priority shall be given to the expenditure of available resources for maintenance, expansion, and improvements of highway infrastructure in the areas most significantly impacted by traffic congestion and areas of the state that need highway infrastructure to aid in attracting economic development. So that's what the numbers represent, and Jay will get into the numbers a little bit. But then what we want to do is take a little deeper dive than we did last year, the first year we rolled this plan out, to talk a little bit about the supporting documentation that goes into these numbers, and which are really project-driven at the end of the day, to get at those two major components of taking on congestion and also providing for economic development across the entire state of Georgia. So with that, I'm going to let Jay jump in and get into some of the numbers and details.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Goosey, I think this was one of them you pulled over on me on the conference committee, because had I known I was going to be here, I don't know that I'd let you put that in there. It was late at night. No, in all seriousness, this is one of the things that come out of HB 170, the reports that we're supposed to submit to you. And really, it's the categories and the percentage of where we anticipate that we're going to spend the money. And if you look at construction of new highway projects, if you look at 17 and 18, you'll see that it's at 43 and 44%. And then after that, as the commissioner stated, it's kind of a snapshot. It's where we anticipate we're going to be based off of what we believe is going to be the funding from both the state and the federal government. And construction, if you look, it continues to go up as the years go out. When you get to 2026, you'll see we're at 51%, so that percentage continues to go up. Then if you look at the maintenance of a highway existing infrastructure, if you see that number, we start out at 30%, and you start to see it gradually taper down. The reason is because for so long we didn't have any money to spend, so we wasn't maintaining our current infrastructure. So once we get it back up to an acceptable level, that percentage starts to drop off, and that's where you see your construction of new highway projects start to percentages go up. Bridge repairs and replacements, that's pretty steady. You'll see it slightly increase. But as we've all talked about for years, that's a very important piece. We want to make sure that our bridges, both on system and to the commissioner's credit, off-system bridges. The commissioner has put a lot of emphasis into off-system bridges and contacting local governments around the state saying, these are as important to us as as on-system bridges. So we're making sure that we continue to try to repair the bridges. Safety enhancements, when you look at this percentage, you might say, well, it's at 8%, but embedded in the other three categories above it is safety as well. So there's safety in each one of them. When we're looking at construction of new highways, that is something that we look at. When we look at maintenance, safety is added in. So the percentage shows 8%, and you see it pretty steady, but it's actually their safety is in these other categories as well. And then administrative expenses, as you see it's at 9%, and it's pretty steady throughout the whole thing. But that was that was the plan according to HB 170 that we would present to y'all every year. And understanding it's a snapshot because we're basing this off of what we perceive is going to be the federal funding. We have the FAST Act now, but depending on, it was a 6-year plan with 5 years worth of funding. So as we move forward, depending on what the feds do, we may have to go in and adjust this. Let's flip over to the second page and talk a little bit about transparency. Georgia Department of Transportation probably has never been more transparent than it is today. Part of HB 170 and our commitment was to go in and create www.garoads.org. And this is a website where you can go in and find anything you need to find about a project, your Senate district, your House district, a congressional district, a county, or whatever. You can go in and plug in and find out what you need to know about any project that's out there in the state. And I think this is very important because we have really tried to get to the point where we have prided ourselves on the fact of being transparent. We now, from a social media standpoint, we're out there. We're constantly speaking with local governments, local groups around the state, having that public input and involvement. And just so each and every one of you know, we're about to start our STIP process, which is the 4-year plan. So over the next couple of months, you will probably be hearing about these meetings that will take place locally with your local governments, talking to them and putting together that next plan for the next 4 years. So STIP development will start here in the next couple of months. So you should be hearing about that. I'm now going to turn it back over to the Commissioner.
Thank you, Jay. If you turn over to the next page, again, as the GA roads are the projects that are behind those percentages, I wanted to talk just a minute about how do we get at those projects? How do those projects come about in those categories that are enumerated in the code section? And this is actually a policy that we put in place this time last year, and it was a board action. So our State Transportation Board adopted the strategic and basically asset-based approach to prioritization of projects. And so they hit in several categories, and I'll just hit the few highlights. And if you look at page 3 there, number 1, construction of new highways. So that first category, under all those bullets are all the considerations that go into deciding how projects move forward, to give a little bit of comparison and contrast, because we have project needs all across this state, obviously for construction of new highways. And I should have said earlier, construction of new highways are capacity type adding projects. So you're taking a 2-lane road, making a 3-lane road. You may be building passing lanes. You may be making a 2-lane road into a 4-lane road. It also includes like express lanes and projects like that. So those are construction of new highways, are those capacity type adding projects. So these are all the considerations that go into there, such as, is it on the freight network, for mobility and the good of this state for commerce? What's the future congestion when you look at traffic models? What does the future show that there's a heavily congested area? Is it congested now? Also, one of the sort of neat things down toward the bottom is there skin in the games from the local governments too? So is there a local government advancing probably a local road, but they need help with funding to advance a need? So what's the skin in the game, if you will, from potentially a local government? So all those factors get into construction of new highways. When we get into the second one is maintenance of the existing infrastructure. I'm very excited and proud of what the folks at GDOT's been doing. Is we have a really good rating system to rate the pavement conditions across the state. And we take a every 2-year look at a detailed analysis of those conditions. And we then take those condition assessments and break those down into 4 categories of roads. So the entire state system is in 4 categories of roadway based on its prioritization, with the highest being interstates, those type of roads, down to the lowest category, which may be a low volume, very rural road. And then the way they allocate the prioritization is we put dedicated funds in all 4 categories. So there's funding even for the lowest volume road, and there's funding for the most critical road. Now, obviously, it's not the same amount of funding, but you take a very much an asset-based approach based on the state route prioritization number we have, and then the condition of that asset in that category. So just so you know, there is a very scientific way of deciding which road gets resurfaced or capital rehabilitation on that roadway, or if it's concrete to be repaired. Very similarly, on the next page, on page 4, is bridge replacements, and highly scientific, if you might suspect that as we rate and review bridges every 2 years, every bridge in the state, including cities and county bridges, they have a condition rating, and all the elements of the bridges have condition ratings. So it's a very scientific fact that we looked at the overall condition of the bridge, but the other things that come into play is it access to critical facilities such as a hospital, to schools, to power plants, to an economic generator. So if that bridge is, sitting right there for a major industry and it's not strong enough, that's a real issue. The other thing they look at is what's the detour route. So if something catastrophic happened, is there a very long detour? So they, again, take a prioritization system of condition and other factors, being those I just mentioned, and then they come up with a scoring system to prioritize bridges. One of the things Jay mentioned earlier, and we're excited about, is we will be sending letters out to city and county officials saying we've identified through this criteria-based program that your bridge in your city or county needs to be replaced, and we would like to help you replace it. So we're actually becoming proactive to say to cities and counties, based on a strategic look at these bridges, based on condition and these other factors, to say we want to take an active role in replacing them. And really the only thing we're asking is that the local governments fund half the right-of-way cost. We'll take care of it, but let them fund half the right-of-way cost. So it's a really big, I think it's going to be a really good thing to take care of our bridges. I didn't bring enough to pass around, but I'll give you one visual tells you the story. And I know if you're like me, you probably can see it from back there. I can't see it from close up. All that, which looks like it was shot with a shotgun, are bridges that are posted. So that's over 1,600 bridges in Georgia that are not strong enough to hold up a legal load to drive across them. So we really want to try to reduce those numbers. So just so you know what's going on in bridges. Safety enhancements, again, is a very data-driven. When you move into the next category about what are we doing about safety, and those safety projects are just that, projects that provide safety. They may be operational in nature too, such as building turn lanes and medians and things like that. But those are all based on crash reports, crash data, fatality numbers, and so they become a prioritization through that process. So it's, again, a data-driven process of determining where there's improvement or investment that needs to be made. Also falls in there is signal upgrades, working on traffic signals, working on the connected signals where all the signals on one road are connected and talk to each other and coordinate it. So again, a focus driving there on data. The last category, again, in our board policy is administrative expenses. And again, that's really straight out of the code section that says we look for those efficiencies. Anytime you can find an efficiency or savings, we're going to put that back into a project. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. So if you flip over to page 5, again, a major tenet of the code section is prioritization of investment of traffic congestion projects and economic development projects. So, you know, we want to continue to build on some of our recent successes on reduction in congestion like we did on the I-75 express lanes that just opened a few weeks ago. I think many of you have experienced those and see what a great attribute they have been. And so as we move forward, we have what was revealed last year was the major mobility improvement projects, which is that map on the left. And that's, you know, 11 projects that total about $11 billion that have a major improvement on mobility, whether there's freight mobility or congestion, and they sort of go hand in hand. Starting down in Savannah, the bottom right corner is I-16 and I-95 project, which rebuilds the interchange and adds capacity on I-16 down to 516. And as you work your way up, one of the projects we have, which is an economic development and a capacity reduction or congestion reduction projects, is providing a commercial vehicle lanes along I-75. We know that today that about 20% of the traffic is trucks. We know in the future it goes to 1 in 3 vehicles or tractor trailers as the freight needs and as the port is expanded. And so again, already suffering from a capacity need now. We see that project moving forward. And also we look at express lanes around 285, up 400, continuing to add on to capacity on I-85 up in northeast Georgia, again, for freight movement. So, at the heart of the legislation is focusing on reducing congestion and economic benefit. The right side of the map there, on the right side of the page, is, again, non-interstate freight investment that over the next 10 years. And that's 45 projects that total about $1.8 billion to continue to build our freight corridors and complete the key segments of things like 441, State Route 17, US 1, 133, finishing up those 133 corridors. So again, providing for economic development throughout the state for freight mobility and all the good things that come when freight and agribusiness can flow freely throughout the state. So again, that's non-interstate investment. So those projects are boiled into the 10-year plan. When you go back to the percentage, these projects are captured back in those percentage of construct new highways. And so that's, again, sort of what's behind the percentages. We wanted to share that with you. And it's quite impressive. Again, a pretty balanced approach. And when we talk about balance, we think about equity a little bit. So I'm going to hand it off to Jay and let him talk a little bit about how these dollars are sort of spent across the state.
And I know most of you probably already know this and understand, but here we still have congressional balancing in the state, which it means that 80% of the funds have to be congressionally balanced. That is sometimes a difficult task because now you have freight network, your interstates, and earmarks are all exempt. So in some of your areas it gets tough because when you exempt those out, then it gets tough to go in and try to get balance within certain congressional districts. But I think if you'll look at the 10-year plan, in 2017, the total expenditures among the urbanized areas is 53%. and 47% in non-urbanized or rural areas. So when you look at that, it's pretty evenly divided between rural and metropolitan areas around the state of Georgia. So that is something that we're going to continue to try to do. If we've got numbers as you look going out, it stays pretty steady. Now, when we're talking about, understand, this number are all metro areas around the state. So that's where you come in at that 53%. It's not just one particular one. So 53-47 is where we're at today, and we stay pretty steady as we go out for the next 4 or 5 years, right around that same range. Interestingly, in a couple of years, it actually shifts a little bit the other way, but then it turns and goes back. Once you start to see MMIP kick in, those are heavy years where we're starting to spend a lot more of the money in the metropolitan areas. But we continue to try to do what we can to make sure that every area of the state gets their fair share. And it depends on where you're from. Sometimes people say, well, you're spending way too much money here, you're not spending enough money there. And so we will actually want to go back and check ourselves, and that's where we went back and we come up with these numbers to make sure. You got TIA regions that are in the state already. There's 3 of them, so we want to make sure as we pass the TIA law, we said that no region should be penalized by the fact that they passed it. So we make sure that they get their fair share as well. And to be honest with you, you've got 2 regions right now in the state that are looking at putting TIA back on the ballot. Actually, Middle Georgia region has already moved forward, and they have their executive committee in place. And South Georgia region now, actually, a couple of the counties have passed resolutions, and so we're looking for the rest of them to act on theirs as well. So I'm going to turn it back over to the commissioner now and let him talk about some of the efficiencies that's in the department.
The last part of that code section was talking about efficiencies, again, to anything that could be saved or done more effectively to plow that back into investment of infrastructure. And I don't think I've been shy to tell you that we're the smallest DOT in GDOT's history, maybe except for 1916 when it started. But so we're having to be very efficient in what we do. But part of those efficiencies came with HB 170 or state dollars that where, as we've talked about before, we've been able to move state dollars to complex infrastructure or capital expansion projects or new highway projects. And the example I always give is the State Route 20 project in Cherokee and Forsyth County, of which we could not get a solution that using the federal dollars that the public would accept because it was so invasive. We have a couple other of those examples around the state, even 133 down in the south part of the state where the federal was causing you to bisect farms and working farms and agribusiness to a bad effect. But we've been able to strategically allocate those dollars to projects where we can get done what we need to do in an effective manner and move some of those federal funds over to do things such as capital maintenance, as resurfacing roads or rehabilitation or even capital bridge maintenance. And I'll show you at the end, there are limitations in that. And we'll talk about those details. But the other thing I just want to talk about for a minute and is, again, how we're doing more with less people. And especially in the maintenance arena, doing preventative maintenance and routine maintenance that the men and women of GDOT historically have done. You can see that procurement trend table right there in the middle. So far this year, we've put 404 contracts on the street totaling $178 million for, well, excuse me, that's I misspoke. That is the engineering component. But we've done, since January of last year, we've done $205 million of contracts for maintenance activities such as cleaning pipes out, replacing pipes, patching, clearing trees back. You've seen a lot of vegetation of clearing trees and debris off the right-of-way, replacing the concrete slabs. If you've been on any of the concrete roadways, I get to get stuck in one every night when I go home because they start at about 7 o'clock and I need to get home earlier, I guess. But you can see that capital investment, and that has been really good for small business as well. And this again is my sales pitch to encourage you to direct people to that garoads.org website. If they're interested in doing any kind of business, we need more contractors to do business. We have a great team of Georgia highway contractors that do those big jobs, but some of these smaller ones are well suited for small business. So in the bottom right corner just shows you a very simple way of how we have on-call services to do that work. The next page is again a little bit of an emphasis on that this is pretty strategic in how you develop these percentages, and especially how you fund these projects. And just a little bit of overview is as grateful as we are for the state funds, and we know that Chairman Schuster Congressman Schuster from Pennsylvania is here, who was here earlier this week, the chairman of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. We still have to have those federal funds. It's no laughing matter. 1.3 billion is what is Georgia's share this year. It moves up a little bit next year at about 1.4, I believe. That's still fundamental, but with those federal dollars, if you look down really look to the bottom of the sheet, under FAST Act, it looks like an org chart. Those are the federal fund sources. So the federal dollars come in all those 11 buckets across the top, and then I believe there's 6 buckets underneath that that limit how you spend those dollars. So we don't get one checkbook of federal dollars and say spend it how you want. And I think, Jay always likes to point out the ones down bottom. Jay, why don't you show them those?
Yeah, sometimes we get asked a question because we're very, very constrained with our federal dollars. And so sometimes we'll get asked a question, why are you doing this project down in this little bitty town? Well, if you look, you've got 3 different buckets down there that are population restricted. In other words, 5,000 or less population, Z232. So you may have more projects that you want to do under Z240, which is your most popular category, but you're out of money there. And then you see this project that's done down in a little small town. You're like, why are you doing that project when this is more important? Well, that's why, because we have to spend that money in a town or city of 5,000 or less. Z230 funds, they're controlled by our MPOs around the state. And there's 16 MPOs here in the state of Georgia. They control those. So when you look at your federal program, a lot of times it's difficult to be able to sit there and see that all these dollars are constrained. And so we can't spend them exactly where we may want to spend them because we have to spend them according to these different fund codes versus state dollars where we can go in there and spend them wherever we may choose to spend them. So the federal side of things gets a little more difficult, and we have to work through those MPOs in those metropolitan areas as well. So when it comes to federal funds, it gets pretty intense. The next page, on page 8, if you will see that we have a lot of plans, and you can see we've got them here today. This is actually the tips. This right here is a book that's got every single plan for the tip in it around the state of Georgia. So every metropolitan area has their own tip, and here it is. Now, it'd be easier to go on garoads.org to look at it than to do this. But when we start looking at projects, we have a lot of different studies and all to back them up. Everything that's in this document, these percentages and these projects come from these different plans that we have. And if you go through, I'm not going to go through every one of them because I don't think y'all want me to, but it gives you an explanation of some of these plans in the back here. But we have data, we study each project, we look at it, and as we said, we've got more plans probably sometimes than we care about. But if you want any of these, we'll be glad to gift you a copy of them, but to be honest with you, you'd be better off to go online and get them yourself for that. With that, I think that about wraps us up as far as what we had to say. Be glad to try to answer any questions.
We'll take some questions. Senator Gooch? Yeah.
Jay, you talked about the MPOs and they're putting their steps forward to you. How does that impact our ratios on this 10-year plan? In other words, my memory back on the DOT board with Brandon was they pretty much presented their plan, and we didn't have a whole lot of say in what they presented. Is that still the case? So if they present their step, does that not impact the rest of the state on these categories?
No,
the 10-year talk through that real quick if you don't mind.
Not necessarily. They control the Z230 funds, but the Z240 and all, we still work with them, partnering with them on projects and all. And to be honest with you, we get some money from the MPOs this help, just like with the downtown connector resurfacing from the Z230 funds that they have. We've actually, in fact, we were just in a meeting yesterday and had a discussion about we expect some of the Z230 funds to go towards some of these MMIP projects. You know, we're making a huge investment here in this area. Then we expect the MPO here, which is the TAQC, to step forward and put some of their funds toward these projects as well, because it is a system-wide approach. And so, yes, they drive a little bit of it. They do. I mean, local governments have to work through them to get their projects in there, to get them approved, to be able to move forward. But we do work in conjunction with them.
Maybe I wasn't asking the question properly. If this is basically the guide that we're gonna set up certain buckets of funds, 43% last year, for
Yeah.
example, went to construction of new highways. If we're saying that 43% of our funding has to go to construction, are the MPOs obligated to follow that same ratio? Or do we have to make up the difference and sort of sort of like congressional balancing? Do we have to adjust the rest of the state because their plans don't follow those ratios?
Yeah, no, and it's a complicated answer. You're generally correct in the fact that the MPOs have the autonomy to make those decisions by their policy committees, and in Atlanta it's the TAQC. I guess we have 2 votes on that out of 20, I believe. I may be wrong, it may be a little bit more than that. But as Jay talked about, we work with those. The other MPOs around the state, we work pretty much in conjunction and usually get good agreement on the type of projects. But to the extent those federal dollars are allocated for their use, so whatever comes forward is their plan. And now they've got as many plans as stacked up here on the table as well. So there's science and study behind that. So I think it's hard to answer. So it's hard to say, okay, we're going to mandate X percent and the MPO must spend that. Now, the one thing that is sort of unifying that across the nation is in the FAST Act, there was a provision to have performance requirements from the states and the MPOs, especially with asset condition of their existing infrastructure for roads and bridges, and try to uniform that across the nation, but in a safety as well. The way it was written in the FAST Act is the MPOs could set their own targets that could be different from what the state targets are. We haven't experienced that in Georgia. We all work together very well. But it does mean that, MPOs could spend differently. They could put all their money in one of those buckets if they chose to, as long as there wasn't a funding prohibition on it. They have some other funds that, like the enhancement funds. They're now called Transportation Alternative Program. It's one of those 11 we talked about, and so they put money into those kind of projects as well. Sorry, that's not a real easy. You ask a hard question.
I was just curious if their projects take priority over the rest of the state, and do we just have to sort of balance the rest of the formula based on this document? And if so, that creates a problem, So
Well,
I think you
again,
answered it.
yeah.
I'm just trying to
Yeah,
clarify
I
what
got
my
you.
intention was for asking
got
the
you.
question.
And again, by far the Metropolitan Atlanta ARC is the largest share of that because it is proportional by
Sure.
population. So there is a bigger proportion of dollars allocated to MPOs because of the Atlanta
An
size.
example, I hate to dominate, but the resurfacing of the interstates here in Atlanta, like perimeter, the 285 perimeter, that would absorb just about all of your resurfacing money, I would think, for the MPOs. You know what I'm saying? That would skew that percentage.
could.
So that's a lot of money you have to take into consideration. Can I ask another question? Different topic. Are you still using the PACES scale when you're evaluating
Yes.
resurfacing? How does that look today versus a year ago since the new money has come in? Are we seeing an improvement on that overall around the state?
Well, good question. Yes, we use, again, that rating system, and we've actually enhanced it. We're doing that every 2 years, because every year got to be too much, and at the time, prior to HB 170, we weren't keeping up anyway, so it was just got depressing. But, so we've gone to a 2-year cycle. We just have completed the 2-year cycle now, so we're getting that data in. My understanding is it's ticking up, but again, this work that we've put out really in the 18 months hasn't come to full fruition. One of the things, though, is very neat that we're seeing is our districts are doing forecasts. So when they go out and do pavement preservations, they're forecasting that their PACES ratings number gets better. So it's like school, 100's the best, down to 0 you don't want, right? So they're going in and forecasting when they make an improvement, how much better their PACES rating has, and then they all have performance targets. Each district has a performance target that they have to meet for their roadways. So they're really data-driven, focused on making sure they're doing the right pavement preservation techniques, getting the most we can out of our dollars in an efficient manner. So the news is not quite finished, and when we have that, we can show you, but we know that the curve was going down, and it should be bottoming out and coming back up. And then, as Jay talked about, once it comes back up to a acceptable level, we level off the investment, and then you can keep it. As long as you can keep it there, then you don't have to spend quite as much in maintenance.
So you can shift your
correct.
resources back to construction.
Mhm.
So what's your number? What's your target now? 65, 70? What's your average?
On
that you-
PACES ratings,
Yeah, that you
it
would like
varies
to-
based on asset category. So
Mhm.
interstates, we try to be at 82,
Okay.
82 out of 100. And we stay that's at the high. In critical, we go to, critical's 82, high's 80. Then we get down into the 70s for medium and low. I think 72 is low. So a low volume road may not be pretty and shiny and smooth and black, but it will be crack filled, it will be patched, it will have stripes on it, and it will hold it in a good condition. And then ultimately you will make a capital investment in it, but you're trying to strategically make that at the right, proper time to maximize your dollars.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Man, you almost done a great job.
Put 'em to sleep.
I do have one question for both of you, and that is, as you just stated, Congressman Schuster was here. And I met with him Monday afternoon, and he was telling me that he met with the president, and the president said, we're going to get you some money for infrastructure.
That's fantastic.
And he told me, he said, you guys need to get your top 5 projects you want and be ready to go. So my question to you is, are the top 5, are there those 5 projects in that big book?
Oh,
Are they, are they shovel ready? Are we ready to go if besides the 1.3 billion of federal funding we get, if another, trunk of money came in, are we ready to spend it? And do we have 5 major projects you'd prioritize to say this would make a huge difference if we had the money?
Absolutely. Now, we definitely do. And again, these major mobility projects we've talked about, and has a finance component to that. So if there's any dollars that come, then we don't have to finance those projects. That frees up dollars in the future. So that's a win-win. We just almost like doubling down on it. So yes, those are projects that can move pretty quickly.
Right.
Most of them they're all design build type projects. Some of them are very big and still will take time, but we can certainly accelerate those projects to the extent we can. Nationally, and we had this conversation just very briefly with him. Nationally, DOTs don't have plans just all stacked up in the corner, just waiting to bid them, because nobody's had the money to make the investment in the design if you don't have the money to build them. And so there's not a state that I'm aware of that just has, that quote, the old shovel-ready term, which nobody really liked. But to the extent we have continued capital maintenance needs, bridges, just like this, we can move pretty quickly on those kind of opportunities and capital maintenance pavements.
So you're saying the pipeline, you don't have a lot in the pipeline as far as shovel-ready to go?
That's where
I would tell you the feeling I got from his comments, or from the comments he got from President Trump, was that he wants to build new infrastructure
Right.
with these, if he's gonna do extra dollars, whether it's a trillion or whatever, there's all kind of numbers being thrown around. He wants new capacity, new
Right.
construction and so on. So I'm just telling you, let's get ready, but I will tell you the other thing Chairman Schuster told us, we are the envy of every other state. He's traveling all over the country right now, and people are looking at Georgia for what we did, and thank you to Representative Roberts and Senator Gooch and really everybody sitting up here and everybody in the room that helped navigate House Bill 170, because it's really, people are bragging about us. So,
And we have sent, Josh has already got a copy of our MMIP list up to Senator Perdue and got it in his hands, and they're working that as well. So we've got those projects already sent up there showing them what we're looking at doing to hopefully be able to help if that comes through.
I've got one more final question, and I'll turn it over. Senator Gooch has another question. Talk about freight rail a little bit, freight coming off Savannah. I know I've been told it's about 18% comes out on rail. The rest is truck traffic. We know what's going on down in Savannah with the port and so on. Are we trying to do things to enhance freight coming out on rail and trying to get that 18% up to?
Well, we certainly support that wholeheartedly.
And I know that's
moving
more
freight
about-
on rail. I mean, that frees up capacity on roadways and just it can be more efficient in a lot of circumstances. So whenever something like that's going on, we certainly partner with Georgia Ports Authority. I mean, they really look at those intermodal yards. We've been in constant contact with them. Got a meeting coming up in just a few weeks with them again to be engaged and be a partner. And also, part of that expansion of freight rail in the ports is they did receive a fast lane grant last year, of which again we'll partner in that of raising the roadway of 25 over Pipe Makers Canal and a bridge over a canal and the railroad yard, so that the trains are not stacking up in Garden City causing delay to the motorists there. So absolutely, we look
Okay.
to partner at
Well,
all
thank you.
opportunities.
And we have partnered a little bit already on some bridges to try to go in and raise those up, because now everything's wanting to come out double stacked. So trying to make sure that on the rail line that our
Right.
bridges are where they can go on them from double stack. So we're working with them on that as well.
Okay. Senator Gooch?
Trying to think my other question. My first, then maybe this is a question for our next transportation meeting, not necessarily too much today. Truck lanes, I wanted to ask you where you were on that study, and then I want to talk about the GRIP program. Tell me, are we still trying to achieve the GRIP plan from 30 years ago? Some of these people weren't even born when that was created. Has it been updated in the last couple of years? Do we need it? How much money are we spending on that? And so it does impact what we're doing here today. So
Yes. So the truck lanes, we had a study done by Cambridge Systematics, and it come back that we'd see a savings of 40%. It is a barrier separated, 2 lanes, northbound on 75, basically from Macon to, right now it goes to 155, where hopefully we'll be able to take it a little further up. But, everybody likes to concentrate on the fact that we're talking about truck lanes. Well, they're getting a free pass, so they're getting this. This is about freeing up general purpose lanes. Right. This is about safety. This is about making sure you've got a barrier separated, you've got 2 lanes for trucks, clearing up in the GP lane for passengers to be able to run. Safety, capacity added, and if any of you've traveled up right now, safety, 75 is just slammed. If you're coming up, 75 trucks are everywhere. They're jammed up. And if you've traveled managed lanes, and I don't know if the commissioner was going to discuss it or not, but when we opened up the managed lanes on 75, you're seeing as much relief almost over in the GP lanes, because now you've got, the cars that are over here in the managed lane, so it's taking the pressure off of those. So those are flowing better than what we probably, I don't know if you anticipated that they would flow as good as they are, but right now they're flowing good. I will be testing out the southern part of it today whenever we leave here to see how well it's going to flow at this time of the day. But
is it true they've renamed that corridor the Georgia Autobahn?
That's correct. I have traveled it. The Colonel I don't need you to hear this. I have fractured the speed limit in there, and but so far they're running great. But so to answer your question, yes, the truck lanes are going to make a significant impact. We believe with the increased traffic, and some people say, why only northbound? Why not north and southbound? Well, we would love to have done them southbound as well, but it was a money issue, to be honest with you. But we were trying to get that truck to their end product, wherever it may be, whether it was here in Atlanta to be broken down to be able to transfer it out, or on past here with that product loaded on it. So we wanted to get that loaded truck through here as quick as possible, and its safety is as much as anything else. What was the other?
Grip.
Grip. You want to take that?
So the GRIP plan still exists because that's statutory. That's under Joe Frank Harris, when the governor at the time. So the plan still exists, but only thing we're really focusing on are the freight mobility, what came out of our freight plan. And that was in here in this map, which over the next 10 years is 45 projects that finish up the major corridors. And there's places where sections are missing. 441 is a good example. A lot of 441 is built, but there's key sections that are missing. And so the goal is really to finish out components of the GRIP network that make sense and that really have a freight movement, agribusiness movement kind of thing. So they will exist. Those projects are still out there. They don't go away unless something statutorily happens. And I don't remember the percentages off the top of my head. It's in the high 80s of the original GRIP work, like 80-something% of the original network, but the GRIP network expanded over time. And when you look at the total network, percentage is not as high, maybe in the 60s. I'm shooting for the hip, so don't write that down or anybody report on that. We can get that. But the really important part is what's in this map is those key grid network, and it almost becomes a north, south, east, west network that radiates from the interstates, because that's what GRIP was trying to do, was connect you back to the interstate and get you within a 20-mile radius of a 4-lane highway. So we see that, and that actually, the freight study and our freight plan has that kind of detail in it to say those corridors need to be worked on. These others, you can wait, and that's part of the plan.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? You got something?
Just following up on what Chairman Beach had said earlier about the federal government and the anticipation of additional dollars. With all your express lanes in the pipeline, the design build, you've got the infrastructure in place or setting that up to move those projects fairly quickly. If those dollars did come down and you got word from start to finish, when do you think you'd actually be ready to move on one of those projects?
Well, on the projects that are in the Major Mobility Improvement Program, the earliest one is I-85 expansion in Gwinnett up into Barrow and Jackson County, that we will be underway this spring and take bids this summer on. And that project is, the way we have approached this project is the same way we approached Georgia 400, of where we're going to say, here's how much money we have, how far can you build? So we're going to deploy that same strategy. So if there was a windfall or money or a dollar, federal dollars coming forward, we could extend that all the way to Jefferson. Our first approach is that we probably get it to the Brazelton area, but if there was more federal dollars, then we could extend that further. And obviously, that's a huge freight corridor. I believe it was about a 60% reduction in travel times when you add those additional lanes out in the future, not immediately, but it's a huge investment. So if those dollars came, that one is again ready to go. The environmental work's done. There's really no right-of-way to buy, so you could do that. The next project's coming online really short after that. It would be really next summer, looking the next summer or fall, is I-16, I-95. That one has more environmental work to do, but within that time frame, and usually, if Congress acts, when the time the dollars flow, we would be real poised to do that one. And again, that project, it has a small finance component to it that we don't have all the dollars up front. We're going to have to allocate dollars over about a 3 or 4 year window to fund that project. So again, those are two projects we can move immediately on. Those two right there total probably close to $800 million, maybe a little bit more, just doing those two projects. So, if you got, $1 billion, you can knock off a couple of projects very quickly. And the other projects follow suit. The ones that are the express lane projects, and the two interchanges at I-20 on east side and west side are lagging behind because they do have to have right-of-way acquisition, and that's the issue, is you still got to buy that property. But if we had more dollars, we could deploy that to buying property too, and help, and anything you can leverage now helps that payback piece at the end, of which strategically what we try to do is pay back the developer over a short period of time, usually 4 or 5 years past construction. So any of those things would accelerate and move things forward, and then free up dollars in the future to do more projects. So it would be a manna from heaven, maybe.
So we're really poised as well, if not better than any other state, to move very quickly and take advantage of any additional federal dollars.
I feel really good about it.
You got anything?
We're done. I mean,
I-
you okay? Anybody else? Well, like I said, we're not gonna take any action today, and we hate to make y'all come back, but we'll wait and we'll work with Josh. I know y'all may be traveling to DC in the next week or so, but we'll get together, and we may even meet separately, just in my transportation committee and Representative Tanner's, and we'll try to coordinate it best we can. But thank you. Y'all do a great job. Y'all work well together, and we appreciate all you do. With that, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.